Good morning. Welcome to today's session on onboarding that works. I'm Alex. I head up marketing at Citation Canada. We'll give it just like about 10, 15 seconds for anybody else to join. It's just the top of the hour, and then we'll get started. All right, I see a minute pass, so we can get going. With the start of the new year, we just find a lot of businesses are gearing up to hit their goals, and that often involves bringing on new employees. So the first few days and weeks in a new role, they really play a significant part in whether that individual ultimately performs well and whether they stick around for the long term. So we're just excited to share some best practices that our own organization follows to set our new hires up for success. A couple housekeeping items before we get going. We are recording today's session. We'll be sending out the recording to everyone who registered in the next day or two. We may have some time for a few additional questions towards the end of the session, so please feel free to use the Q&A functionality within Zoom at the bottom of your screen and let us know what you'd like to hear more about. Just a quick introduction to Citation Canada if you're joining us for the first time today. We're a Canadian headquartered software and services company specializing in HR and health and safety management and compliance. For over 15 years, we've been helping thousands of businesses across Canada keep their teams safe, engaged, and set up for success. Our goal is to make it easier for organizations to navigate the complexities of compliance while building great workplaces. We're also part of the Citation group of companies that share that aim of building better businesses around the globe. And I'm joined today by two colleagues from Citation Group's HR team. I'll let them introduce themselves. Becky, over to you first.
So hi, I'm Becky, a HR business partner here in Citation, and I've been with Citation for around 2 years now, and I work primarily with our sales teams here.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm also a HR business partner in Citation. I've been with Citation about 3.5 years now, and I work primarily with our service colleagues.
Fantastic. Now, you both onboard into the same company, but you support very different departments. So what's unique about onboarding in sales versus professional services?
So I think a big difference that stands out to me is that in our main sales function, we typically recruit in cohorts and we aim for a minimum of 3 to 4 colleagues per intake. And this is because we have a 4-week training program, and that's designed specifically for group learning, as it includes role play, interactive sessions, and plenty of peer-based practice. So for the first 3 weeks, new sales starters won't be on the phones at all. Instead, they spend that time getting to know who we are as a business, understanding our products, and building the confidence that they need before speaking to our customers. And if you're a smaller business, it might be the case that you're not recruiting for several people at once, and that's absolutely fine. The principles still apply, but just be mindful that without a cohort, the new colleague might need more of your time and attention because they won't have those peers to learn alongside. And a little bit of extra support in those early days really does go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, I look after our service department. So that includes our health and safety and HR and employment law consultants. It's really important to know sort of consultant roles aren't for everyone. They're very different to being an on-site HR manager or a health and safety manager. So it really is crucial that people fully understand the job role before they start, before their onboarding process. Service onboarding is very different to sales. So our consultants are client-facing. They're specialists within their professional areas. They have professional qualifications. So their orientation process focuses far more on knowledge, content, and technical understanding rather than just pure skills-based training. We also embed what we like to call the Citation Way into all of our onboarding training. And that's just to make sure that we ensure consistency in how we deliver consultancy and support to clients.
Makes sense. Now, thinking back to some great onboarding experiences that you've led, what made them stand out?
So I think one experience that really stands out to me is feedback that I received from a new colleague when they were around 3 months into their role. They told me that our onboarding felt really refreshing compared to previous sales organizations that they'd worked in. And that's because in their past roles, the expectation was always to get the new starter on the phone as quickly as possible with minimal training and to simply pick it up as they went. But anyone who's worked closely with sales teams will know that confidence is absolutely key. And throwing people straight into calls might feel efficient, but it often undermines that long-term performance goal. So what made our onboarding stand out for them was that we really take the opposite approach, as I've already touched on a little bit. So we take that time to nurture the confidence before anyone even picks up the phone. And new colleagues go through that really structured learning on our products, our services, and most importantly, how we like to sell. So that foundation means that when they do start speaking to customers, they're not just ready, but they're capable, they're comfortable, and they're set up to succeed from day one. So this feedback really reinforced that investing upfront in their development creates that path to true competency. For them, it's being properly guided on our offering, and that ultimately meant that they understood what they were doing and why, and that made them more successful faster.
One thing that sticks in my mind is we had a colleague join us from the fire service about 3 or 4 years ago now, I think. He described the fire service to be kind of very old school and quite rigid. He couldn't believe how many touch points he had before even starting, and how many touch points he had sort of after he joined, and then the support that he received from different people and different teams throughout his first couple of weeks. He joined us as an entry level health and safety consultant. He graduated as a fully fledged health and safety consultant, and he's now actually a team leader. So this is just a really great example of how effective onboarding and the development pathway can really elevate someone's career. And it's something that both small and large businesses can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in order to get organized, I have no doubt that you have lots of checklists that get you keep you on track as you're going through onboarding. Obviously, at Citation Canada, we offer up several helpful onboarding checklists and guides in our platform for our clients to use, but we know that that's just a starting place. So, why is it the wrong approach to think onboarding is mostly just HR and checklists?
I agree. I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of it's checklists and it's HR. And obviously checklists are super helpful, as are HR, we always hope. But I always say that HR makes up such a small percentage of how colleagues actually experience onboarding, probably less than 5% when we really look at it. And once someone joins, the people who truly shape their experience are their managers and their team. So onboarding isn't an administrative process. It's that relationship building process. And the most meaningful parts of onboarding happen through leadership, team culture, and the support that a new starter gets in their first week. And that isn't to say that HR don't play a part. They absolutely do. We are a facilitator of onboarding. In Citation, we'll run induction sessions and step in where someone needs additional support. But that is just the structure around what we do. The real onboarding always happens through those human connections and the people that your new colleague is going to work with every day.
Yeah, and that's why onboarding can never sit solely just with HR. It really is a team effort. So when you step back and you look at it, so many people are involved. You've got the recruitment team, the HR team, IT, their hiring manager, and then also coaches, sometimes even buddies or mentors in the first couple of weeks. In larger businesses, obviously like ours, those teams are more defined, but even in smaller organizations, you can still draw on the people around you to kind of help create a great experience for that new colleague. Getting a mix of colleagues involved really does help the new starter feel supported, connected, and part of something from day one. The strongest onboarding definitely happens when everybody gets involved and plays a part.
Yeah, that makes sense. But obviously, especially in smaller companies or ones where there's not as much turnover, those people aren't doing onboarding every day, right? So, what do those leaders underestimate about onboarding?
I'd say the importance of planning that first week. So, with any new starter, if the manager isn't with them, then what's the new colleague doing? And who can help support? Because, yes, a lot of that time is spent with the manager, but lean on those people around you because having a new starter can feel like a full time job because they need constant direction. They don't have that workload yet, they don't have that connection with their stakeholders. So that time planned is so beneficial. So don't underestimate the full life cycle that goes into planning and onboarding a new colleague and how many people are involved, and then also setting that time aside for the admin and the training that goes alongside the role as well.
Yeah, the prep work is absolutely critical and key for success. Everything needs to be set up before the new starter arrives. So ask yourself these things. Do they have access to all the systems that they'll need? Have you created their orientation plan? Have you scheduled introductory meetings with the key people and the key teams that they'll be working with? taking the time to prepare all of these things up front means that the new colleague can hit the ground running, and it signals that you're organised as well, you're ready for them, and you're genuinely excited and invested in their success. There's nothing worse than starting a new job role and spending the first 2 days kind of scrambling around the office, following your new manager, trying to get things sorted. So I would definitely say that that is one of the most important things.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the first couple of days. So what should the new hires takeaway be from that first day in a new role?
I think the most important thing, I mean, we can talk about lots of different things, but the most important thing is that that new colleague feels welcome, excited, and valued. So even if, the induction isn't perfect and the orientation process isn't perfect, they'll remember how they were made to feel far more than whether every step of the way kind of ran smoothly. The people matter so much more than the process, and that is really what should shine through on day one.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to remember that starting a new job is such a big step, leaving kind of the comforts of your last job and stepping out and starting to work somewhere new can be really daunting. So by the end of day one, we want all new starters to feel really confident that they've made the right choice and that the culture and the values of the business genuinely align with what they were expecting. And whilst we want colleagues to have a brilliant first day, it's really important that it's authentic as well. And challenges shouldn't be masked in the role or challenges that the company are facing at that time if appropriate. Being really realistic helps build trust. And that's why we proactively share any existing challenges that we're having with the role specific areas or wider if appropriate, but in a really constructive way, in that these are the challenges that we're facing at the minute, but we're addressing them. We're going to tackle them together, and we're genuinely excited to have the new starter's skills and experience to really help move things forward as well.
Yeah, that feeling of being needed is great as well, of course, if there's something to actually work on. Now, what does a strong first week look like? So how do you avoid overwhelming someone while still helping them to ramp up?
I think it's so important during the first week to mainly motivate them, make them feel valued, like I said before, and make them feel excited. But then another biggie is making sure that you have regular check-ins with them. So how is your new colleague finding things? Are they ready to progress? Are they ready to learn more, or do they want to spend time on the current focus area? You want to make sure that people are comfortable with what they're doing before you progress them onto the next stage or onto the next thing to learn. You don't want to overwhelm on the first couple of weeks, sort of ease them into it gently.
Yeah, absolutely. And this time, your first kind of week or two is absolutely critical for building relationships because you can take a little bit of time to learn the role and nurture kind of the skill set that's needed, but you can't go back and rebuild the relationships that you really curate in your first couple of weeks. So yes, we can repeat training, but you can never redo those first impressions and how your relationship's going to form. So something that I would recommend is scheduling extra time into training sessions, just so that you've got that time to go off topic, ask questions, and really get to know each other a little bit more. Because ultimately, people stay in businesses for people a lot of the time. So don't underestimate the impact of really getting to know your new starter.
Yeah, knowing the person and the individual is really important. And in fact, the onboarding process should be curated to the individual. So, how do you do that in practice without blowing up that process?
I think building on what I said before, just making sure that you're checking in with them from day one. So, and also set clear boundaries and take the time to understand how they would like to be managed and communicated with. So, good questions to ask them during the first couple of days, couple of weeks would be, how do you prefer to receive feedback? What do you need from me? What helps you feel comfortable and confident? Once you know their preferences and how they like to communicate and how they like to work, you can then adapt your approach accordingly to that. Those early conversations make it much easier to tailor the onboarding experience to that individual and ensure that you do it with enough time to do so and really make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every single role will have different expectations. And whilst there's always an ideal of how quickly you'd like someone to be competent in the role, it's really important to be able to adapt and make sure that the pace of learning is right for that colleague. And as Olivia has already said, communication is really, really key here to ensure that this part is done well. And I'd also like to add that whilst we want the colleague to be communicating with us and we'll ask them questions and expect them to tell us things, they might not always be comfortable to speak up and be an advocate for themselves and say that they're not comfortable with something, or they'd like to go over something because they're not sure they fully understand. So as a manager and a leader, being attuned to your new starter is equally as important as asking them questions, because if you don't think something's going right, it's on you as well to pivot. And I think taking ownership of that is really, really important.
Absolutely. Can you share an example where you had to adjust the onboarding approach for someone and what changed because you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone is different and they'll have their own individual differences. Someone that comes to mind here is a new starter who was struggling a little bit with our training because a lot of the training content was written, and we had a chat with them and they advised that they learn best from hands-on experience as opposed to reading, because they struggle with kind of digesting written information. So what we did was we set them up with a buddy who they then shadowed, and they were able to ask questions along the way as well. And what we didn't want to do was for them to lose out, on that learning experience because they didn't digest written information all that well. So what we were also able to do was provide them with software that read text documents aloud to them so that they could listen to the information as well to digest that instead of having to read it.
Yeah, and this isn't a single kind of example, but I think it's really important to talk about flexibility and adaptability. So we often have to adjust the onboarding approach for different colleagues within the training period. So you might have 6 people starting at the same time, all with completely different learning styles. So tailoring their experiences to each one of them is so crucial. Yes, of course, it may take a little bit longer, but the return is so worth it. You get far much higher engagement, confidence, and long-term capability when the learning feels right for that individual. And like Becky said before, if people don't know their preferred learning styles, use trial and error. It's up to the manager to pivot when they sense someone would benefit from a different kind of style or a different approach. And keep checking in with them, like I keep saying, but you might check in with them and they might say that everything is fine because they perhaps don't want to tell you otherwise. But it doesn't always mean that they are genuinely comfortable. So that's where a leader would step in, I would say. And to be able to do that, make sure that you're always observing, adjusting, and intervening early enough so that you can set them up for success.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about successful onboardings, but how does a poor onboarding actually show up in terms of retention, performance, or manager workload?
Yeah, we have spoken a lot today about how to onboard effectively, but the truth is, a new starter does require such a lot of investment. But it is within your best interest to make sure that you get it right the first time. So, in terms of retention, we know that poor onboarding is one of the strongest predictors of early turnover. Some stats for you. So, research shows that companies with effective onboarding see up to 82% higher retention, whilst poor onboarding drives up the number of resignations within the first couple of months. So essentially, the first kind of 90 days are really that make or break period. Things like poor structure, lack of clarity, and disconnection really do drive those early resignations. So that's why we want to make sure that we get it right.
Absolutely. And in terms of performance, poor onboarding often results in that slower ramp up, lower confidence, and inconsistent delivery. So new hires who don't receive clear role expectations or structured training spend far more time figuring out things themselves, which delays effectiveness and increases risk of early mistakes. Whereas in contrast, structured onboarding, particularly when supported by that really documented learning path, it significantly improves role readiness, which ultimately helps employees understand what good looks like and performs more effectively from the outset. And then I know that we've touched on kind of the management side of it as well, and how that will impact management. So poor onboarding also has a significant impact on managerial workload. So when the processes lack clarity, new colleagues naturally lean on more heavily on their managers and teammates for guidance. So this ultimately leads to an increase in that one-to-one support and repeated explanations of really basic processes. And this additional pressure can be substantial, especially given that workload is identified by the Harvard Business Review as the #1 cause for management burnout. So when we think about why it's so important to onboard effectively, we're going to have a knock-on effect on management if we don't really focus on the importance of onboarding and really get it right the first time. So that's ensuring that onboarding is intentional, consistent, and well-planned. It isn't just good practice, it's essential, and it directly supports the manager's well-being and sets a new colleague up for long-term success. So it's a win-win. It's super important, and I really can't stress that enough.
Absolutely. So, if you want to get the managers invested in onboarding, remind them that this is to their benefit, right? It'll help them in the long run.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the most common onboarding mistakes that you see?
Thinking onboarding ends after 2 weeks is probably the one that really screams to me. So those early days generally cover the basics. So the paperwork, the systems access, and initial introductions, but they don't build confidence or capability. Real onboarding takes longer because new starters need time to understand expectations, learn processes, and build relationships, and also be able to feel fully integrated to the team.
I think I would say is the most common sort of onboarding mistake I would see is people not being realistic about the role. So I think I touched on it at the start, but being realistic about what the role involves right from the interview stage is such an important thing. It's a really big mistake to sugarcoat it. There's a job out there for everyone. So the thing to do best is just to be honest and upfront about what those expectations are from the job role. So when people start, they know exactly what they're stepping into, and they're far more likely to settle and stay longer and enjoy it.
Yeah, makes sense. So, if you had to leave leaders today with three things to remember about onboarding, what would they be?
My first one would be that onboarding is not a set period. It can last as long as a year. So do not underestimate that time.
I would say onboarding is a team sport. It's not just a HR task.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think both Liv and myself are very much aligned on our third one is that a personalized onboarding experience beats a perfect process. Your new starter will remember the people and how they were made to feel more than not being able to get into the laptop on the first day. So take that away and really think about the individual when planning onboarding.
Yeah, I love that. Now, before we wrap up, I think we have some time for a few questions that have come in during this conversation. There's quite a bit of chatter in there, so we'll hopefully get through at least a few of these. First, what process would you recommend for a department manager to help them be accountable for the department onboarding?
Yeah, I would say probably the scheduling of the meets and greets in the first week and then the training plan during the orientation. This is probably one of the most important things because you can then be in control of their time and you can manage it to however you prefer. And then on the flip side of this, it also enables you to manage your own diary as well and your own workload during the first week because, like we said before, it's a big thing having a new starter. It does take a lot of time. So making sure that you've got all that set up beforehand and kind of taking control of that as the manager will take away that little bit of stress from the first week.
Now, this next one is about that really fun, all the documentation, the administrative tasks, all that stuff that you mentioned really takes up a lot of time in that first week. How can you make having to do all of these policy and procedural things more engaging for the new hire?
Yeah, so ultimately, these aren't the most exciting things. I don't think we can sugarcoat it, but they're so important and they have to be done. So always set aside time to go through these things. And there's nothing worse than new colleagues having to rush through all of that training because they haven't been allocated time. A lot of the time, automated systems will send reminders and that'll add to their initial stress in their first week. And it also means that they might not take everything in if they're not given the time to really be able to digest that information. But also on how to make them more engaging, try and make things interactive. So if you're doing an online session, can you do something fun like a quiz, or can you have polls in there along the way? Or if you're doing it in a different way, can you read and sign policies? If that's what you're doing at the minute, could you look at modules instead where you've got someone on a video and talking them through it with a quiz at the end to test their knowledge that can issue a certificate? There are loads of different platforms out there that can be utilized. And also, I think if you're a small business and you don't have the resource for that, get creative. I think there are so many things that we can lean on and utilize now that it doesn't always have to be a read this Word document and sign at the bottom that you understand. We can really think outside of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. This one's a little longer, so bear with me a moment. So, in growing organizations without a dedicated HR role, onboarding often focuses heavily on compliance, safety, and administration, as we've just said. How can leaders and teams intentionally infuse the employee experience, such as connection, purpose, confidence, into onboarding while still keeping it practical and manageable in a fast-paced operational environment?
Yeah, so I would say have a mixture of, of all those things during the first week. Focus on the things that they absolutely need to do for their job role and for compliance reasons. But then also do those nice things as well, like you just mentioned. And then also it might be good to do things like meeting new people, job shadowing, call listening, and try and mix that up with the compliance things and the admin time that the admin tasks that you've got to do. And sort of created a bit of a mixture for that. Things like that are really good to do because it helps build relationships during the first week. It sets expectations as well and provides clarity on their role, which makes people feel really comfortable. So I think, yeah, just mixing those two things, the nice to dos and then the have to dos.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would say mix them up definitely.
yeah, makes sense. All right, how can we keep onboarding personable while onboarding more of the process, reducing manual effort for HR coordinators and working within limited resources?
Okay. So you can absolutely keep onboarding warm and human whilst making processes more automated. The key here is to automate the admin and not the connection side of things. So even with limited resources, it might be that you can create simple forms on MS Forms, say Microsoft Forms, or can you create email templates so that you're not sending out the same email every single time? Can you reduce that manual process? And so it's just a click insert name and send. If it is just like a welcome email, or these are all the things that you need to do in your first week. So forms I definitely recommend for collecting information so that you don't have to have someone sat there whilst they fill out a document. And also sending reminders. I think proactivity here and having recurring reminders or automated forms is something that is really freeing in terms of time for your HR coordinators for that really repetitive manual work. So what this means if you're able to do this is that the time that your HR coordinator does spend with a new starter can be more focused, more personal, and more meaningful, and really kind of have that focus of relationship building rather than paperwork as well.
Yeah. All right, I think that's probably all that we have time for today. I know that there were a few other questions in the chat that maybe we weren't able to get to. If you are already a Citation Canada member, onboarding is a topic that our advisors specialize in. So absolutely feel free, if you have access to live HR advice, to give a call in and get some more support. If you're not yet a member, great reason to become one is access to that live support and advice around onboarding and myriad other HR processes and legislative requirements. So with that, I will thank you, Becky and Olivia, for your expertise today. Thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. We will be sending out the recording. It should be in your inbox soon. So if you want to revisit anything here or share it with a colleague, please go ahead. Our next webinar will be coming up soon on February 10th. It'll be on the topic of managing conflict amongst coworkers. So we hope you'll join us for that. For now, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.